The Battle of the Somme began on July 1st, 1916, and ended on November 18th. In those 141 days, almost 1.3 million men were killed or wounded in one of the bloodiest battles in history. Planning started in January 1916, when the French commander Joseph Joffre and Sir Douglas Haig, commander of the British troops in France, decided to launch the first large Franco-British offensive. Though it was of no strategic importance, they chose to launch it at the Somme. By late June, the armies were stationed in the Somme Valley, stretched out in a 35-kilometer line. On one side, the German Second Army under General Fritz von Below. On the other, 5 divisions of French troops and 100,000 British, including 910 Newfoundlanders. Zero hour was 7:30 a.m., July 1st. It began to go wrong immediately. 100,000 British soldiers marched into no man's land and were cut down by German machine guns. Within hours, almost 20,000 were dead and more than 35,000 wounded, the worst loss in British military history. Winston Churchill, who was commanding a battalion at the Somme, argued against continuing. Allied losses were double those of the enemy, but the Allied commanders pressed on. 2 months later, on August 30th, the Canadian Corps joined the battle, supporting the first tank attack on the Western Front near the village of Pozières. Pozières was a ruin, mounds of red bricks, broken timbers, houses buried in mud. The 16th Battalion, the Canadian Scottish, held the line, but at great cost. The tanks were almost useless, bogging down in the mud and breaking down mechanically. The Quebecers of the 22nd Regiment had orders to capture Courcelette, a German-occupied village. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Louis Tremblay wrote in his diary, "We know very well that we are heading to the slaughterhouse." He was right. A few days later, Frank Mayhew of the Ontario 21st Battalion wrote to his wife, "All my friends have been either killed or wounded. There are only a few of us left, but we have succeeded in reaching our objective. My dear wife, it is worse than hell here. For miles around, corpses completely cover the ground. We were walking on dead soldiers." The battle finally ended in November when snow and sleet made fighting impossible. The landscape was a ruin. It was impossible to tell victor from vanquished. The Allies had lost 623,907 men, the Germans 660,000. They referred to it as Das Blutbad, the bloodbath. The Canadian Corps suffered 24,000 casualties. In the end, what was gained was 13 kilometers of destroyed farmland and a few ruined villages. David Lloyd George, who would become Prime Minister a month later, described it as the most gigantic, tenacious, grim, futile, and bloody fight ever waged in the history of war. The Somme was all of those things.